The beloved game show host abandoned his trademark smile for a moment of raw authenticity that left millions stunned. What happened next forever changed how audiences viewed the man behind the microphone. In just seconds, Harvey would risk his entire career to deliver the most powerful shutdown in television history. The Family Feud studio hummed with familiar energy, a carefully orchestrated ecosystem of entertainment that had been perfected over thousands of episodes. Bright lights beamed down on smiling families dressed in their Sunday best, each group color-coordinated and buzzing with nervous excitement, hoping this would be their lucky day, the day that might change their financial futures forever. Stagehands rushed about, making final adjustments to the iconic set, while audience members settled into their seats, phones reluctantly tucked away after multiple reminders from the warm-up comedian who had spent the last 30 minutes priming them for the perfect reactions, for most of them. This was the highlight of their year. A chance to see the legendary Steve Harvey in person, maybe even make it onto TV, and return home with a story they'd tell at every family gathering for decades to come. The excitement was palpable, almost electric, with whispers and giggles rippling through the crowd as they anticipated the moment the star would appear. The production assistant counted down, the applause sign illuminated, and Steve Harvey strode onto the set with the confident ease of a man who had found his perfect place in the world after years of searching. His custom suit, one of hundreds in his famously extensive wardrobe, fit impeccably across his broad shoulders, his trademark mustache perfectly groomed. His smile gleamed with practiced warmth, and his presence immediately commanded attention in a way that couldn't be taught. The audience erupted into thunderous applause at their first glimpse of him, some even rising to their feet in admiration. What they saw was a man who had mastered his craft, a consummate professional who had transformed a fading game show into must-see television through sheer force of personality. The network executives watching from their monitors knew the truth. Ratings had tripled since Harvey took over hosting duties. His facial expressions alone had spawned countless memes and viral clips that kept the show relevant in the social media age. His comedic timing, his genuine interactions with contestants, his ability to find humor in unexpected moments, all of these had made him irreplaceable. What most audience members didn't know was the long, difficult road he had walked to reach this point. The kind of journey that shapes a person's character in ways that can lie dormant until the perfect moment forces them to the surface. Behind that million-dollar smile lay years of struggle. Sleeping in his car during his early comedy days, showering in gas station bathrooms while trying to make it, grinding through comedy clubs for audiences of sometimes just a handful of people, facing rejection after rejection from industry gatekeepers. Harvey knew intimately what it meant to be down on your luck, to be judged by strangers based on appearance alone, to fight for dignity when the world seemed determined to strip it away. The production team respected him not just for his talent, but for his work ethic. Harvey was always the first to arrive and the last to leave, reviewing notes for each family, memorizing details about contestants to make their interactions feel more personal. He treated the crew with the same warmth he showed to executives, remembering birthdays and asking about family members by name. This wasn't just a job to him. It was a platform he had earned through decades of persistence. But that wasn't the Steve Harvey on display today. This was the polished entertainer, the household name, the man who made families feel instantly at ease as they competed for cash and prizes. As he took his position and the cameras began rolling, everything felt exactly as it should. Another smooth day of filming the show that had become his signature success. The contestant families, the Johnsons and the Garcias, shook hands with theatrical good sportsmanship before taking their positions at the iconic podiums. The first few questions proceeded exactly as planned. Harvey delivered the prompts with his characteristic charm, reacting with exaggerated disbelief at some of the more outlandish answers, congratulating the clever responses with high fives and shoulder pats. The audience laughed on cue. The scoreboard tallied points, and the comfortable rhythm of the show unfolded just as it had hundreds of times before. During a commercial break, Harvey engaged in his usual banter with the audience and contestants, a chance to keep the energy high while the production team reset for the next segment. It was during this seemingly routine moment that the day's trajectory would change irrevocably. But what no one in that cheerful studio could possibly anticipate was how quickly the atmosphere would transform from entertainment to confrontation. From light-hearted game show to a moment of moral reckoning that would soon be watched by millions around the world. The second round began with the easy confidence that comes from a show running smoothly. The Garcia family had taken an early lead, but the Johnsons were determined to catch up. The next question promised more of the same family-friendly humor that had made the show a staple in American living rooms. Name something people might give to a homeless person. Harvey read from his card, eyebrows raised in anticipation of the predictable answers that would follow. Food, money, clothing. Jessica Johnson, a 34-year-old dental hygienist from Cleveland, slapped the buzzer first. She was the kind of contestant producers loved. Attractive, articulate, with just enough personality to be memorable without disrupting the flow. Her previous answers had been solid, if unremarkable. Money, she answered confidently. Show me money, Harvey responded with his trademark enthusiasm. The board flipped to reveal it as the number one answer, and Jessica's family erupted in celebration. With control of the board, the Johnson family began working through the remaining answers. The typical pattern unfolded, some reasonable guesses, a couple of strikes, the strategic decision to play rather than pass. But as the round neared its conclusion, something shifted in Jessica's demeanor. She leaned toward Harvey with a conspiratorial smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. You know, Steve, I actually had an encounter with a homeless man last week that was just, well, it was something else. Her voice carried a tone that immediately put several production assistants on edge, the subtle inflection that often preceded problematic content. Harvey nodded politely, his professional smile fixed in place as he prepared to gently guide the conversation back to the game, if necessary. Is that right? He responded, giving her just enough rope to either pull herself back from the brink or hang herself entirely. Jessica failed to recognize the warning. Oh yeah, I was downtown with my friends, and this homeless black man came up to us asking for change. She emphasized black in a way that made the studio suddenly feel colder. And I swear, he was wearing nicer shoes than I was. A few uncomfortable titters emerged from the audience, the nervous laughter of people unsure how to respond to something inappropriate. Jessica, mistaking this reaction for encouragement, continued with growing animation. So I told him, honey, if you can afford those sneakers, you don't need my dollar. She laughed loudly at her own story, looking around expectantly for others to join in. I mean, you know how they are. Probably spending it all on booze and drugs anyway, right? The ye-all-set silence that followed was deafening. One audience member coughed awkwardly. Another shifted in their seat with an audible creak. Jessica's family members stared straight ahead. Their earlier jubilation evaporated, replaced by rigid smiles that screamed discomfort. The director frantically whispered into his headset, uncertain whether to cut to commercial or let the moment play out. Two production assistants exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their recognition of what was unfolding, the kind of train wreck moment that could either destroy a show or become its most memorable episode. Jessica, still oblivious to the tension she'd created, doubled down. I mean, come on, we've all thought it, right? She turned to Harvey with an expectant smile, clearly anticipating that he would either chuckle politely or smoothly transition back to the game. Her expression conveyed a disturbing assumption that behind closed doors, away from the cameras, he would naturally agree with her assessment. What she failed to understand was that she had just crossed an invisible line, one that separated the casual bigotry people sometimes got away with from the kind that would trigger something in Steve Harvey that few had ever witnessed on camera. As the words hung in the air, something shifted in Steve Harvey's expression. Something that made everyone in the studio suddenly hold their breath. The congenial host seemed to physically transform before their eyes, his practiced smile fading like a light being slowly dimmed, replaced by something far more authentic and infinitely more powerful. For 3 heartbeats, Steve Harvey stood perfectly still. The studio, typically alive with energy, fell into a silence so complete that the soft hum of the overhead lighting became audible. In that suspended moment, the production team froze, uncertain whether to intervene. The director's finger hovered over the button that would cut to commercial, but something held him back, a professional instinct that told him he was witnessing a rare, unscripted moment of television truth. The floor manager's hand signals halted mid-air, the teleprompter operator stopped scrolling, and even the normally restless camera operators held their positions with unusual steadiness. The transformation in Harvey was subtle at first, then unmistakable. The practiced smile that had carried him through thousands of episodes disappeared entirely, like a mask being carefully set aside. His shoulders squared beneath the expensive fabric of his custom suit. His eyes, usually crinkled at the corners with perpetual amusement, hardened with a clarity of purpose that sent a visible ripple through the audience. His jaw tightened, and a vein pulsed almost imperceptibly at his temple. Physical manifestations of the internal shift taking place. This wasn't the carefully crafted television personality anymore. Not the man who mugged for the cameras or delivered punchlines with perfect timing. This was the man who had slept in his car during his darkest days, who had washed up in public restrooms before auditions, who had faced discrimination with dignity, who had rebuilt himself from nothing through sheer force of will and unwavering belief in his own worth. The raw authenticity of his presence suddenly made the bright studio lights, colorful set pieces, and the entire artifice of the game show seem superficial and small by comparison. An executive producer watching from the control room would later describe it as watching someone step out of a role and into themselves. The kind of genuine moment you spend a career hoping to capture. A veteran camera operator who had filmed presidents and celebrities across 3 decades in television would tell colleagues it was the most electric thing I've ever witnessed through a viewfinder. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, stripped of its showman's cadence, absent of the performative inflections that typically punctuated his delivery. "Let me stop you right there." The words came measured and deliberate, carrying a weight that made Jessica's smile falter for the first time. The microphone picked up the subtle change in his vocal timbre, a resonance that seemed to bypass the ears and speak directly to something more primal in those listening. "I'm going to need you to explain exactly what you mean by, 'you know how they are.'" Harvey's emphasis on the word "they" hung in the air like a challenge, a gauntlet thrown down with such quiet authority that several audience members involuntarily straightened in their seats. His head tilted slightly, the gesture of a man who was prepared to listen, but who would accept nothing less than complete honesty. Jessica blinked rapidly, her confidence wavering as she realized the moment had shifted in a way she hadn't anticipated. The spotlight that had seemed so welcoming just moments before now felt uncomfortably hot and revealing. Her hand fluttered nervously to her collar, adjusting it though it needed no adjustment. Oh, you know, just homeless people. They always have stories, right? Her attempt at recovery rang hollow even to her own ears, the words hanging in the air like cheap ornaments on a wilting tree. Harvey took one step closer to her podium, maintaining unwavering eye contact. The movement was minimal but purposeful, the physical equivalent of underlining a statement. No, that's not what you meant. And we both know it. The simplicity of the statement, delivered without anger but with absolute certainty, carried more impact than any shouted accusation could have. A camera operator instinctively zoomed in on Jessica's face. Capturing the precise moment, her casual certainty crumbled into confusion, then defensive anger. The high-definition lens caught every detail. The slight flush creeping up her neck, the way her pupils contracted, the momentary tremor in her lower lip before she pressed them together in a tight line. In the control room, the director silently signaled to stay with this shot, recognizing the raw human drama unfolding. "I don't think I appreciate what you're implying," she said, her voice rising slightly as she glanced toward her family for support. They remained frozen, eyes averted, creating a visual representation of her sudden isolation. Her husband studied the floor with unprecedented interest. Her sister-in-law became fascinated with her own fingernails. The abandonment was subtle but unmistakable, a wordless distancing from what she had said and what was now unfolding. Harvey nodded slowly, as if she had confirmed exactly what he suspected. There was no triumph in his expression, no gotcha moment of satisfaction. Only a solemn acknowledgement of something unfortunate but not surprising. He turned slightly, addressing not just Jessica but the entire studio audience, and by extension, the millions who would eventually watch this moment. His body, language opened up, inclusive rather than confrontational, a physical signal that what he was about to say was meant for everyone present. "Let me tell you something about those people." His voice took on a resonance that commanded complete attention, the kind of tone that makes listeners lean forward involuntarily. The phrase, "those people," carried a subtle emphasis that highlighted its ugliness when isolated and examined in the open air. When I was coming up, trying to make something of myself, I was homeless for 3 years, living in my car, washing up in gas station bathrooms before auditions. The revelation sent a ripple through the audience. Many had heard pieces of Harvey's story before in interviews or his comedy routines, but never delivered with such raw emotion, never in this context. An older woman in the third row pressed her hand to her heart. 2 college students exchanged glances of surprise. A man in a business suit blinked rapidly, fighting unexpected emotion. During that time, I experienced 2 types of people in this world. He held up one finger, the gesture deliberate and professorial. Those who saw me as less than human because of my circumstances. A second finger joined the first. And those who recognized my humanity despite those same circumstances. He paused, allowing the dichotomy to settle in the consciousness of everyone listening. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was pregnant with reflection, the sound of hundreds of people mentally sorting themselves into one of those 2 categories. I remember a woman at a convenience store who wouldn't make eye contact while handing me my change, like my condition might be contagious. The personal anecdote landed with quiet power. And I remember a man who offered me not just spare dollars, but his business card, who said, "When you're back on your feet, and I know you will be, give me a call." Talent is talent, regardless of current address. Harvey's gaze returned to Jessica, who now stood completely still, her earlier smugness replaced by the dawning horror of someone who has miscalculated catastrophically. The camera caught beads of perspiration forming along her hairline, the subtle but unmistakable physical manifestation of social discomfort. What determines a person's character isn't whether they're homeless or what color their skin is. Harvey's voice grew quieter, yet somehow more powerful. The paradoxical acoustics of absolute moral conviction. It's how they treat others when no one's keeping score. It's who they choose to be when they think no one important is watching. The studio had become a vacuum. No shuffling, no whispers. Just the shared experience of witnessing something authentic breaking through the polished veneer of entertainment. Several audience members were openly wiping tears. A cameraman later admitted he had to fight to keep his shot steady as emotion threatened to overwhelm him. Even the most cynical PA, a young woman who prided herself on being unimpressed by celebrity, would later confess she felt like something fundamental shifted in the room. Like we all grew up a little in those few minutes. Harvey wasn't finished. His expression shifted from confrontation to something more complex. Disappointment layered with determination. The face of someone who had seen this particular ugliness before and had long ago decided not to let it pass unchallenged. His shoulders relaxed slightly, not in surrender, but in the quiet confidence of someone standing firmly in his own truth. You know, we film this show, and we edit it, and we try to keep it light and fun for the families watching at home. He gestured around the studio. But some things matter more than entertainment. Some moments call for us to be more than what people expect of us. The production team exchanged glances. This was unprecedented territory for a game show, but not one person moved to intervene. The authenticity of the moment had created its own protective bubble. A tacit understanding that what was happening transcended the usual rules and formats. I've spent a lifetime being underestimated, being told where I belong and don't belong. Harvey's voice took on a deeper resonance, drawing from wells of experience that the bright lights of his success couldn't illuminate. And I promised myself that if I ever got to a position of influence, I would never let someone be diminished on my watch without saying something. The transformation was complete. The game show host had disappeared entirely, replaced by a man standing firmly in his truth, about to deliver the kind of moral reckoning that would reverberate far beyond the confines of a single episode. In that moment, Steve Harvey wasn't performing for ratings or viral clips. He was modeling what moral courage looks like when the stakes feel real and the easier path would be silence. Jessica's hands gripped the podium, her knuckles white with tension as she faced what was coming. Not just Harvey's words, but the unavoidable mirror they would hold up to choices she had made so casually, without ever expecting to be called to account for them in front of a national audience. The cameras captured it all. The subtle tremble in her posture, the defensive angle of her chin, and most tellingly, the growing realization in her eyes that she had inadvertently revealed something about herself that couldn't be easily dismissed or laughed away. What came next would be remembered and referenced for years. A masterclass in confronting bigotry without creating spectacle, in holding someone accountable while still acknowledging their humanity, in transforming what could have been merely awkward television into a moment of genuine moral clarity. Family Feud has always been about bringing people together. Harvey continued, his voice finding a new register, authoritative yet accessible, like a pastor who has momentarily set aside the prepared sermon to speak directly from the heart. about celebrating our differences and our similarities, about recognizing that when we laugh together, we grow together. He glanced briefly at the nervous producers huddled near the cameras, their urgent hand signals suggesting a commercial break, then deliberately turned away from them, making a decision that transcended the rulebook of television production. His slight headshake, barely perceptible to the audience but crystal clear to the production team, communicated his intention. This moment would not be sanitized, abbreviated, or avoided. It would not be edited into a sanitized clip that missed the substance of what needed to be said. What you just said. He addressed Jessica directly, stepping closer to her podium with measured steps that echoed in the unnatural quiet of the studio. That casual dismissal of someone's humanity based on their circumstances or the color of their skin. That's exactly the kind of thinking that keeps us divided as people. His words carried no hint of the performative outrage that had become the currency of daytime television. Instead, they bore the weight of lived experience, of someone who had been on the receiving end of such dismissals and had sworn never to perpetuate them when given a platform of his own. Jessica's posture stiffened defensively, her spine straightening as though physically bracing against his words. The bright studio lights that had seemed so flattering minutes earlier now felt like interrogation lamps, revealing every micro-expression that crossed her face. "I didn't mean anything racial by it," she protested, her voice pitched slightly too high, betraying her discomfort. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a nervous gesture caught by camera 3 and transmitted to the control room, where a veteran director murmured, "Stay on her. This is real." "You're twisting my words," she added, with diminishing conviction. Her eyes darted toward the exit sign glowing faintly in the distance, the universal human instinct to flee from uncomfortable truth, making itself visible. Harvey shook his head slowly, deliberately, his expression neither angry nor triumphant, but resolute. "I'm not twisting anything. I'm simply holding them up to the light." His calm demeanor made her defensiveness appear all the more brittle by comparison. He spread his hands in a gesture that encompassed the entire studio, a subtle reminder that her words had been spoken not in private, but in a space where they could influence millions. When you specifically mentioned he was a black homeless man, when you implied they all spend money on substances, you weren't just making an observation. You were reinforcing stereotypes that have real consequences for real people. His emphasis on real underscored what was at stake, not abstract concepts, but human lives affected by the casual perpetuation of harmful beliefs. The studio remained eerily silent. The usual ambient sounds of a television production, the shuffling feet, whispered directions, equipment adjustments, all suspended in collective focus. Even the typically restless audience sat motionless, many leaning forward as though physically drawn into the gravity of the moment. Jessica's family had physically distanced themselves from her at the podium, creating a visual isolation that spoke volumes. Her husband studied the floor tiles with newfound fascination. Her brother had taken a small step backward, a subtle but unmistakable distancing from the controversy. "Let me share something with you." Harvey's tone softened slightly, becoming more personal, the shift from public confrontation to human connection palpable in the studio. "When I was homeless, the worst part wasn't the physical discomfort. It wasn't sleeping in a car where every unusual sound might be someone trying to break in. It wasn't washing up in public restrooms while trying to maintain enough dignity to face another day of rejection." He paused, his expression momentarily distant, accessing memories he rarely shared in such a public forum. "The worst part was the way some people looked right through me, like I'd stopped being human. The assumptions they made without knowing a single thing about my story. A woman in the front row of the audience pressed her hand to her heart, her eyes glistening. A middle-aged man in business attire shifted uncomfortably, perhaps recognizing himself in Harvey's description of those who had looked away. "People would cross the street when they saw me coming," Harvey continued, his candor creating an intimacy that transcended the artificial environment of the game show set. "Store employees would follow me around, even though I had every right to be there. The same people who might have asked for my autograph today assumed back then that I was dangerous, or lazy, or somehow less deserving of basic courtesy." He glanced around the studio, making deliberate eye contact with audience members, pulling everyone into this unexpected lesson. The cameras caught these interactions, the nods of recognition, the uncomfortable shifts in posture, the moments of connection that transformed abstract concepts into shared human understanding. That man you encountered, the one whose shoes you found too nice, you don't know his story. Maybe those shoes were a gift from a shelter program helping him interview for jobs. Maybe they're the last possession he has from better days. Or maybe, just maybe, he prioritized having decent shoes because when you're on your feet all day, every day, without a place to rest, your shoes become the most important thing you own. Several audience members nodded in recognition of this perspective they'd never considered, the camera catching their reactions in quick, poignant cutaways that would later become some of the most powerful moments in the edited broadcast. "Did you know," Harvey continued, momentarily addressing the broader audience rather than Jessica specifically, "that many homeless shelters report footwear as one of their most requested items? That foot problems are among the most common health issues for people living on the streets." He turned back to Jessica, his gaze direct but not unkind. "When you've never had to worry about having a safe place to sleep, it's easy to judge someone else's priorities without understanding their reality." A production assistant later reported seeing one of the network executives in the control room remove his glasses to wipe his eyes during this portion of Harvey's impromptu speech. "But more importantly," Harvey continued, his voice finding new resolve, "why did his shoes bother you so much? What made you feel entitled to judge how someone in crisis should appear? Would you have been more comfortable, more willing to help, if he'd looked sufficiently desperate by your standards?" The questions hung in the air, not as accusations, but as invitations to reflection. Jessica's mouth opened and closed without sound, the pointed questions leaving her momentarily speechless. Her right hand fluttered nervously at her collar, adjusting a necklace that needed no adjustment. "And let's be completely honest here," Harvey said, his tone suggesting they were finally arriving at the heart of the matter. "When you specifically mentioned he was black, that wasn't incidental to your story. That detail mattered to you, shaped your perception, influenced your response." Jessica's eyes widened slightly, the directness of the observation clearly catching her off guard. The camera captured her swallow hard before attempting to respond. "I would have said the same thing if he was white," she insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. I was describing him, that's all." Harvey nodded slowly, acknowledging her response without accepting its premise. Our words reveal more than we sometimes intend. When we consistently mention race in contexts where it isn't relevant, when we only specify someone's race when they're not white, we're saying something significant about how we see the world. He turned slightly, addressing the broader audience again. "And those words matter. They shape perceptions. They reinforce assumptions. They create the invisible framework that determines who gets the benefit of the doubt and who doesn't, who gets second chances and who gets written off after a single mistake." Harvey paused, then spoke with renewed purpose, his voice taking on the cadence of someone laying out fundamental truths. "I'm not here to shame you. That's not what this is about. Public humiliation doesn't change hearts or open minds. But I am asking you, and everyone watching, to recognize something important. Dignity isn't a luxury. It's a human necessity. The competing family, the Garcias, who had been silent witnesses to the unfolding drama, nodded in solemn agreement. Mrs. Garcia wiped away a tear with the edge of her sleeve, her expression reflecting painful recognition of truths rarely spoken so plainly in public forums. Mr. Garcia placed a supportive hand on his wife's shoulder. Their private moment of connection captured in a brief camera shot that spoke volumes about shared understanding. "We all have blind spots," Harvey acknowledged, his voice gentler now, offering a bridge back from confrontation to conversation. "Lord knows I've said and done things I'm not proud of. I've made jokes I would take back if I could. I've perpetuated stereotypes without stopping to consider their impact." This admission of his own fallibility transformed the moment from accusation to shared human struggle. The question is, when those blind spots are revealed to us, do we double down in defensiveness, or do we have the courage to grow? He spread his hands again, this time in a gesture that invited genuine consideration rather than demanded immediate response. A murmur of appreciation rippled through the audience, not applause, which would have cheapened the moment, but a collective sound of recognition, the vocal equivalent of a thoughtful nod. The director, sensing the importance of capturing this authentic response, signaled for wider shots that included both the contestant and portions of the audience, creating a visual representation of community wrestling with difficult truths together. Harvey allowed the moment to breathe, understanding intuitively that transformation requires space, that the gap between confrontation and resolution can't be rushed if genuine change is to occur. The silence wasn't empty, but pregnant with possibility. The rare kind of television moment where what isn't being said carries as much weight as what is. He turned back to Jessica, whose anger had gradually transformed into something more complex. A reluctant recognition flickering behind her eyes, a subtle softening around her mouth. The defensive posture she had adopted earlier had relaxed slightly, suggesting an internal shift that the cameras captured with unforgiving clarity. "So, I'm going to ask you something important," Harvey said, his tone neither confrontational nor condescending, but earnestly inquiring. Not for the cameras, not for the game, not even for the millions of people who will eventually see this, but for your own journey. Can you see how what you said might have perpetuated harmful stereotypes, even if that wasn't your intention? The question hung in the balance, offered not as a trap, but as a genuine invitation to growth. The production team held their breath, recognizing they were witnessing something beyond the usual parameters of daytime television. This unscripted confrontation had veered far from family entertainment into territory both uncomfortable and necessary. In the control room, executives were frantically discussing whether to cut the entire segment, weighing the risks of controversy against the undeniable power of authentic human exchange. "This could cost us advertisers," one worried aloud, while another countered, "Or it could be the most important thing we've ever aired." Their debate reflected the broader tensions between commercial interests and moral responsibility that defined the medium. Jessica stood at her podium, the game show trappings around her suddenly seeming absurdly trivial compared to the moment of moral reckoning she faced. The lights that had seemed so exciting during her audition now felt uncomfortably revealing, illuminating not just her physical presence, but the character revealed through her words and reactions. Her family watched her with expressions that mingled concern, embarrassment, and something else. A silent plea that she find her way to the better version of herself that might exist beyond this moment of exposure. The Garcia family, their competitors, observed with expressions of compassion rather than judgment, their posture suggesting they understood the universal human experience of being confronted with one's own failings in an uncomfortably public way. Harvey waited with the patience of someone who understood that true change can't be forced or rushed, that the most important conversions happen in the quiet spaces between words, in the internal wrestling that precedes external acknowledgement. His steady gaze offered both challenge and support, the paradoxical combination that makes genuine transformation possible. Jessica's response would determine not just the remainder of this episode, but would become a defining moment in television history, a rare instance where entertainment gave way to authentic human reckoning in real time. Whatever words she chose next would reveal not just who she was in this moment of crisis, but who she might become when given the opportunity to confront the gap between her actions and her better self. For what felt like an eternity, Jessica stood frozen at her podium, the studio lights illuminating the internal battle playing across her features. The cameras captured every nuance of her expression, the initial defensiveness giving way to uncertainty, then to something more complex. Harvey waited, his patience communicating more than words could about the importance of this moment. When Jessica finally spoke, her voice was different, stripped of its earlier bravado, quieter, but somehow more substantial. She began, then stopped, visibly struggling with what to say next. I've never thought about it that way before. It wasn't a full acknowledgement, but it was an opening, a hairline crack in the defensive wall she'd constructed. Harvey nodded encouragingly, recognizing the courage it took even for this small admission. I guess I do make assumptions, she continued, her gaze dropping briefly before meeting Harvey's eyes again with newfound resolve. When I saw his shoes, I immediately thought he must be lying about needing help. I didn't consider any other possibility. She paused, her brow furrowing in genuine reflection. And yes, I probably wouldn't have mentioned his race if he had been white. I never really noticed that about myself before. Harvey's expression softened, not with condescension, but with recognition of the genuine effort she was making. That awareness, that's the first step. It's all any of us can do. Notice our blind spots when they're pointed out to us, and try to do better. An unexpected voice joined the conversation, Mrs. Garcia from the competing family. May I say something? She asked, her voice carrying a slight tremor of emotion. Harvey nodded, intuitively understanding that something important was about to unfold. My brother was homeless for 3 years, Mrs. Garcia said, addressing not just Jessica, but the entire studio. He had a good job in construction, his own apartment. Then a scaffold collapsed. The injury, the pain medication, the lost job, the medical bills. She shook her head, the trajectory familiar to too many American families. He wore nice shoes the whole time, she continued, a sad smile playing at her lips. Steel-toed boots from his construction days. He said they reminded him of who he really was. Not a homeless person, but a worker going through a rough patch. Those boots were his identity when everything else was stripped away. Her husband squeezed her shoulders supportively as she added, "He's back on his feet now, working again, with his own place. But I'll never forget how people looked at him during those years. With suspicion, with judgment, rarely with understanding." The studio remained utterly silent, the game show trappings fading into insignificance against this unexpected moment of human connection. Jessica's family had drawn slightly closer to her again, perhaps sensing her vulnerability, perhaps recognizing the universal experience of having one's assumptions challenged. "Thank you for sharing that," Jessica said to Mrs. Garcia, genuine gratitude in her voice. Then, turning to Harvey, "And thank you for calling me in, not just calling me out. I have some thinking to do." Harvey nodded, acknowledging the courage it took to receive criticism with openness rather than defensiveness. That's all any of us can do. Keep growing, keep learning, keep trying to see each other more clearly. He turned to address the cameras directly, speaking now not just to the studio audience, but to the millions who would eventually witness this exchange. "We came here to play a game show today. But sometimes life gives us more important moments, chances to see beyond our assumptions, to recognize our shared humanity." A spontaneous applause began, starting with a single person and spreading until the entire studio was filled with the sound of appreciation. Not for entertainment, but for authenticity. Not for performance, but for genuine human growth. As the applause subsided, Harvey turned back to the game board with a subtle but significant shift in his demeanor, not returning entirely to his showman persona, but integrating something more authentic into his role as host. "Now," he said, his voice finding a new balance between entertainment and meaning, "I believe we have a game to finish. But I think we've all won something more valuable than points today." With that bridge, the episode continued, forever transformed by the unscripted moment of truth that had broken through the formulaic structure of daytime television. The remainder of the game carried a different energy. The competition still present, but infused with a newfound mutual respect between the families. The incident would later be described by cultural critics as a masterclass in compassionate confrontation, and 5 minutes of television that accomplished more than countless diversity seminars. Network executives who had initially panicked about potential advertiser backlash were stunned when the episode generated not controversy, but acclaim, becoming one of the most viewed and shared segments in the show's history. But in the moment, it was simply this: human beings recognizing each other's humanity, acknowledging their imperfections, and taking one small step toward greater understanding, all under the unlikely auspices of a family game show that had, for a brief and powerful interlude, transcended its format to capture something genuinely transformative. The episode aired 3 weeks later, following intense internal debates at the network. Some executives had pushed to edit out the confrontation entirely, arguing it was too heavy for family entertainment, fearing it could alienate viewers who tuned in for light-hearted fun and laughter. Others, however, passionately argued that they had captured something extraordinary. Television that mattered beyond ratings and ad revenue. Something that could spark genuine conversations about societal issues often left unaddressed. In the end, after heated discussions and a thorough review of viewer feedback, they compromised by trimming the segment slightly but preserving its essential truth. The decision would prove prescient beyond their expectations, as the show would become a reference point for discussions about race, class, and the power of empathy. Within hours of the broadcast, clips began circulating online, igniting a firestorm of engagement. By the following morning, Harvey's moment of moral clarity had been viewed millions of times across various platforms. The reactions were swift and varied, with audiences expressing a spectrum of emotions. Comment sections, usually cesspools of conflict and trolling, filled with thoughtful reflection and personal stories. People shared their own experiences of homelessness, of prejudice, of moments when someone had challenged their assumptions and changed their perspective. Major news outlets picked up the story, framing it as a pivotal cultural moment. Game show host delivers masterclass in confronting bias, read one headline in a national newspaper. 5 minutes of daytime TV that's changing how we talk about homelessness, declared another. capturing the essence of the broader dialogue sparked by the episode. Social commentators analyzed the exchange, noting Harvey's skill in challenging without shaming, in creating space for growth rather than punishment, and in modeling the kind of moral courage that many admired but seldom encountered in public discourse. For Jessica, the aftermath was complex and multifaceted. Initial embarrassment at seeing herself through others' eyes gave way to something more profound. Interviewed months later, she would admit, "I could have doubled down, gotten defensive. Part of me wanted to. But something about the way he spoke to me, not at me, but to me, made me actually listen instead of just reacting." This realization marked the beginning of a transformative journey for her. Emboldened by her experience, Jessica began volunteering at a local shelter, spending countless hours helping to provide meals, clothing, and support to those in need. She later joined its board of directors, where she became an advocate for policies aimed at reducing stigma and increasing resources for the homeless community. "The episode changed my life," she would tell a local newspaper. "Not because I became famous for a minute, but because it made me question assumptions I never knew I had. It opened my eyes to the struggles of others and the importance of empathy." The Garcias, inspired by the episode and their own experiences, established a foundation providing professional clothing and footwear for job seekers experiencing homelessness. They named it Dignity in Transition, a nod to the profound notion that everyone deserves to feel dignified, especially when seeking employment. The program, which started small, would eventually expand to 12 cities, offering not just clothes, but also mentorship programs and job training workshops aimed at helping individuals regain their footing in the workforce. For Harvey, the moment reinforced what he had always known, but sometimes forgot amid the showbiz glitter: that his most powerful contribution came not from his celebrity, but from his authenticity, from the wisdom earned through his own difficult journey. He began to receive invitations to speak at various conferences and events focused on social justice and community empowerment. Each time, he shared the story of that pivotal episode, emphasizing the need for compassion and understanding in a world often divided by stereotypes and assumptions. Network ratings data revealed something executives found both surprising and instructive. Rather than turning viewers away, the unscripted moment of moral reckoning had attracted them. Subsequent episodes saw a staggering 27% increase in viewership. Focus groups indicated audiences were hungry for entertainment that didn't shy away from meaningful human truths, further solidifying the notion that television could serve as a powerful platform for social change. 6 months after the episode aired, Harvey received a heartfelt letter from a man in Detroit, a letter that would resonate deeply with him. "I never write celebrities, but I had to tell you what your words meant to me. I was that guy with the nice shoes. 8 months homeless after my business failed. When you spoke about dignity not being a luxury, I wept. Thank you for seeing me." Harvey kept the letter framed in his office, a constant reminder that our most important legacy comes not from our successes, but from the moments when we stand firmly in our truth, using whatever platform we have to make the invisible seen, to make the dismissed feel valued, and to transform entertainment into something that matters beyond the fleeting moment of its consumption. In television history books, the episode would earn a place as a rare instance where the artificial construct of a game show gave way to something genuine and transformative, where a host stepped beyond his script to model moral courage, where difficult truths were spoken without sacrificing human dignity, and where entertainment became, however briefly, a vehicle for authentic human connection and growth. As the dust settled, discussions continued in living rooms, cafes, and online forums. Strangers connected over shared stories of empathy, and many found themselves questioning their preconceived notions. The phrase, "dignity isn't a luxury," became a rallying cry in community meetings and online discussions. A reminder that everyone deserves respect, regardless of their circumstances. In the months that followed, the show continued to explore themes of social justice, featuring segments on various community issues and inviting guests from diverse backgrounds to share their stories. This shift not only revitalized the show's format but also positioned it as a leader in socially conscious entertainment. Viewers began to see the show not just as a source of entertainment, but as a catalyst for meaningful dialogue and ultimately change. The episode's legacy would endure, influencing a new generation of television creators to embrace the idea that with great power comes great responsibility. The conversations ignited by that single moment would ripple through society, inspiring change in attitudes and policies across the country. As for Harvey, he remained committed to his mission of using his platform for good. He continued to engage in charitable work, focusing on initiatives that uplifted marginalized communities and fostered understanding between different social groups. His journey was a testament to the idea that, even in the most unlikely places, we can find opportunities for growth, connection, and transformation. In reflection, the episode served as a powerful reminder of the potential for compassion and understanding to bridge divides, illustrating that sometimes the most important lessons emerge from unexpected places, challenging us to confront our biases and deepen our empathy for one another. The legacy of that moment would resonate far beyond the confines of a single broadcast, reminding everyone that we are all part of a larger human story, interconnected and deserving of dignity, respect, and understanding.